Good morning, I'm Gretchen Hall. We're coming to you this Wednesday on the 29th day of October, bringing you Morning Matters because your morning's matters. Get to the stories that matter today. More senators have made their statements of assets, liabilities, and net worth or SALNs public. Among those who have filed, Senator Mark Villar reported the highest net worth with 1.26 billion pesos. The Philippines officially accepted the ASEAN chairmanship from Malaysia on the final day of the ASEAN summit in Kuala Lumpur. President Bongbong Marcos called the ASEAN chairmanship an opportunity for the Philippines, noting the country has been preparing for it for 8 months. And the Philippine peso weakened to a historic low on Tuesday, October 28, closing at 59.13 against the US dollar. This marks its lowest level since December of last year. Welcome to our program, Morning Matters, where we talk about issues you need to know for the rest of your day. Now, first on the agenda. With a public pressure mounting for greater transparency, several senators have disclosed their statements of assets, liabilities, and net worth or SALNs. The move follows the Ombudsman's decision to loosen restrictions on SALN access and comes amid allegations of corruption in flood control projects. More in this report.
More senators have released their statements of assets, liabilities, and net worth or SALNs. Out of the 21 senators who have made their SALNs public, Senator Mark Villar reported the highest net worth at 1.26 billion pesos. He was followed by Senator Raffy Tulfo, whose total assets, based on the joint SALN he filed with his wife, Congresswoman Jocelyn Tulfo, amounted to over $1 billion. Next is Senator Erwin Tulfo with a net worth of 497 million pesos, followed by Senate Minority Leader Mig Zubiri at 431.7 million. Zubiri's wealth reportedly increased after selling his shares in Bukidnon Power Corporation and other companies. Senator Camille Villar also declared a net worth of 362 million pesos. Senator Ping Lacson, Robin Padilla, Jinggoy Estrada, and Lito Lapid each declared assets exceeding 200 million. Senate President Tito Soto's wealth was listed at 188 million pesos, while Senator J.V. Ejercitos amounted to 137 million. According to their SALNs, Senator Pia Cayetano reported a net worth of 128 million pesos, followed by Senator Win Gatchalian with 89 million, Senator Bam Aquino with 86 million, Senator Lauren Legorda with 79 million, and Senator Joel Villanueva with 49 million. Senator Risa Hontiveros and Cheese Escudero both declared around 18 million pesos in net worth, while Senator Kiko Pangilinan listed 26.7 million. Senator Bongo and Rodante Marcoleta have also made their SALNs public. This leaves only 3 senators who have yet to disclose their statements: Alan Peter Cayetano, Aimee Marcos, and Ronald Bato de la Rosa. There is still no word on when their SALNs will be released. Following the Ombudsman's move to ease restrictions on public access to SALNs, Senator decided to publish theirs in response to calls for greater government transparency amid corruption controversy surrounding the flood control scandal.
Senator Erwin Tulfo said the quo warranto petition questioning his right to hold office is baseless and politically motivated. He pointed out that the case was filed by a disbarred lawyer who had also lodged similar disqualification complaints against him during the 2025 elections. Tulfo noted that those previous cases were dismissed, calling the new petition a mere repeat of old and unfounded allegations. He stressed that no legal challenge will deter him from performing the duties entrusted to him by the Filipino people and reaffirmed his commitment to serve with integrity. The Independent Commission for Infrastructure has issued new subpoenas to former Albay Congressman Zaldi Co. The commission ordered Co to appear on November 11 and 12 over alleged anomalies in flood control projects. ICI spokesperson Brian Hosaka said the summons were sent to Co's Pasig and Bicol residences, though his whereabouts remain unknown after flying out to the United States for medical treatment. Hosaka added that the commission may cite the former lawmaker in contempt if he continues to ignore the order. Meanwhile, the Department of Justice says it is not closing the door on the Discaya couple even after the Ombudsman ruled them out as state witnesses in the flood control corruption probe. Here is a report.
The Department of Justice says it respects the Ombudsman's decision to drop the Diskaya couple as possible state witnesses in the flood control corruption cases, but maintains that its own review remains ongoing. DOJ spokesperson Attorney Paulo Martinez explained on The Big Story that while the Ombudsman has the prerogative, the DOJ independently evaluates potential state witnesses under its mandate.
The DOJ is independent of the Ombudsman, meaning we have our own assessment of any would-be applicants for state witness, any covered witnesses.
He said the agency continues to assess the Diskaya's testimonies to determine their credibility and value to the government's case. Martinez added that communication lines with the couple remain open.
We are still carefully evaluating the testimony, the contents, and the substance of their testimonies, seeing if there's merit to it, seeing if there's necessity for them or for us to adopt their testimonies and for them to be adopted as state witnesses. We're committed to pursuing justice here, and if the Discayas or any other state witness are still willing to cooperate, our doors are still open, very much open.
Meanwhile, Martinez admitted that there are still no leads on the whereabouts of former Representative Zaldico, nor any update yet on the possible cancellation of his passport.
Right now, we currently do not have any leads yet.
He assured the public that the DOJ is committed to pursuing accountability, vowing that no one will be spared in the prosecution of those involved in the flood control corruption cases. Martinez emphasized that the department's goal is clear: to see these cases through to conviction and deliver justice.
Subpoenas are to be issued soon. We could expect the DOJ and the prosecutors under the DOJ to be issuing the subpoenas for the respondents in these cases. There will be no sacred cows. That's the motto we echo.
Up next, the peso closed at 59.13 against the US dollar on Tuesday, October 28, a historic low and its worst performance since December of last year. We will analyze this with economist Ronilo Balbieran from the University of Asia and the Pacific right after a quick break. Keep it here on One News. Good morning, I'm Gretchen Noan here in Morning Matters. We talk about the most pressing issues and give you the context behind the headlines. The Philippine peso weakened to a historic low on Tuesday, October 28, and that's the peso closing at 59.13 against the US dollar, its lowest level since December of last year. The Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas said the depreciation may reflect market concerns over the ongoing flood control corruption controversy and expectations of further monetary easing. The central bank, though, assured that the peso remains supported by remittances, tourism, and BPO inflows. And joining us today to help us analyze what's going on, we have economist Ronilo Balbieran from the University of Asia and the Pacific. Welcome back to Morning Matters.
Good morning, Gretchen.
Okay, help us understand what's happening now to the economy. The peso hitting record lows, 59.13 to a US dollar. Why is the peso getting weaker exactly?
Well, there are two things. No, there is a long-term trend towards this depreciation because of our trade deficit, and then number two is the short-term, very short-term, speculative aspect to it. No? So the BSP said that it may be actually be a reflection of our the total indication of our feelings towards what's happening in the transparency and corruption in our national government. No? So given that, so we will go back to basic. No? So what is exchange rate? But this is actually the price of the dollar. So it's really a combination of two things. So demand and supply of the dollars. No? So therefore, if you have that particular sentiment, no, against the national government in terms of managing our economy, so you tend to actually hold on to your dollars and probably go somewhere else. And so that will actually now reduce the supply of dollars in our economy. Those that are actually the large part in terms of short-term speculation here is the stock market. So sila yung pinaka nauuna. So if and our stock market is generally around 50%, around half of our stock market money is actually driven by foreign funds, no? And so therefore, foreign portfolio managers would be driving so much of what's happening in the dollar exchange in relation to our stock market. And so that would be a huge short-term fluctuation for our exchange rate. So pagka feeling nila parang feeling ko the Philippine economy might actually slow down. So therefore, they will try to put their investment somewhere else in terms of who are the economies that are projected to be growing faster. So they will temporarily go to those particular economies. And so that's the driver for this short term sentiment in relation to stock market. And then later on, the long term part would be the investments, and then of course the BPOs, the exports, the tourism. So that's why we are taking a look at this particular fluctuation in the exchange rate, as far as how long will this last, no? So we should not be afraid of what's happening now, especially what happened yesterday. But this is already an indication of what can actually happen if this particular investigation, this particular credibility fight of the national government towards actually convincing everyone, no, that we're doing our best to clean up the government. And so that will reflect midterm, short term, and that will actually have implication on supply and demand of dollars. So hopefully, this particular short-term decisions of portfolio managers would be reversed and have, or at least stabilize, the fluctuation of our
Paano,
exchange rate.
paano po yan? Kahapon, sinabi po ng Malacanang, huwag daw magmadali ang taong bayan pagdating dito sa paghahanap ng resulta sa mga investigasyon because they want to do it right. Does that mean that this could go on longer na with the pronouncement of Malacanang?
Um, Yes, no, but the fortunate thing here is how long can our Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas actually manage this particular sentiment, no? So this will be dictated by how much the BSP has dollar reserves, no, in relation to the dollar holdings of other elements of our economy, no. So and
Correct.
as from the last checking, I think the most recent data of BSP indicates that we have at least more than 109 billion dollars of dollar reserve. That's equivalent to 7.3 months of import cover. The threshold is 3 months, no, for a small open economy. So that means if the Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas holds around 25 to 33% of the dollar supply for our economy, so they can actually fend off the negative speculations against our exchange rate. So therefore, they can actually fight it off if this particular situation becomes worrisome. So the worst possible condition is when you take a look at the vault of the Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas and you don't find any dollar reserves, and therefore we will be at the mercy of the portfolio managers. So
Of
and
course, we're
then that
heading off.
particular, yes, the exchange rate will skyrocket, and
Correct.
then our imports will go haywire, and then our dollar debts, no, will go haywire, and so this would be a very very dangerous economic crisis head on. No? But we're very far from that particular situation in terms of facing economic crisis because of the acceleration of the exchange rate. No? So I think just to just compress everything, no? So 59 is not a worrisome exchange rate. In fact, it might actually be better in terms of curing some of the needed correction in terms of our trade, no, of our exports and imports. So because our trade deficit is really bleeding, so this is actually in a way, no, a blessing in disguise in terms of correcting our import behavior, and then somehow, no, help our exporters, our BPOs, and our tourism sector in terms of slightly depreciated currency. Ang ano ko dito, sana wag lang lalampas ng 62, no? So if we have that bandwidth between 59 to 61, this should actually be more beneficial for us, as long as when we take a look at the BSP's vault, there's still enough dollar reserves for the BSP to actually fight a dangerous speculation against our economy.
So, you expect, kumbaga, mga more foreigners coming to invest because of the strengthening of their money as opposed to ours, and mas marami tayong mga exports, tama ba? Because of...
So this is quite tricky, no? So because we're dealing with our currency versus an international currency, no? So it is not just dependent on what's happening inside our country. It is also in relation to what's happening in the US, no, primarily, and then the other parts of the world. So, parang lagi mo tinanong, sino ba ang mas maganda yung takbo ng ekonomiya? Yung Pilipinas ba o yung the rest of the world? Especially yung Amerika, no? So, for example, we've been hearing news about the projected slowdown of the American economy, no? So, this is another blessing in disguise in relation to our economy, no? So we are projected to slow down, but America is also projected to slow down. So it's not that we're praying that they slow down so that we can so that our
But
slowdown is
is the
relatively
US
faster.
dollar getting stronger? Are
Uh,
the tariffs of Donald Trump working somehow?
yeah, so I think that's the trickier part, no, because their inflation, their economy, and then now they're talking about the shutdown in their government because of the budget, no. So I think their situation is much more worrisome if they cannot resolve their particular crisis in relation to their shutdown. No, so again, if we go back and take a look at our economy, no, so what really drives our economy and what will actually, attract long-term investments, because there are two types of investments, no? So the portfolio, which is the stock market, and then the foreign direct investments, no. So what we are really concerned about is the long term, no, the foreign direct investments, so foreigners really going inside our country, establishing factories, establishing offices, because they see that in the long term, so we have actually a healthy market na consumer demand, you have predictable costs in power, in water, in internet, etc. No? So that's what we should be looking at. No? So uh, the way it will be affected is so this corruption, is it actually affecting long-term structures, infrastructure like roads, bridges, power supply, internet infrastructure? So is the corruption eating up
Ah,
bigger in terms of the scales on what businesses actually are requiring for them to actually decide to
to operate.
get, yes, and then the announcement in relation to the 0% tariff rate of our neighbors.
Oo nga
uh,
eh, yun nga yung pinagtataka natin eh, no? I mean, they were supposed to be the closest ally of the United States. What do you
yes.
think is the strategy behind that?
Again, no, so they say, no, so nobody can explain this, and perhaps according to Jeffrey Sachs, no, not even Trump can explain himself. So therefore, we are at the mercy of this unilateral decision of Trump in relation to 19% versus 0% with our closest neighbors. So, but then I think again, the the short-term problems for us is to really manage the sentiment and the speculation, because this can really go unmanaged, or this can actually be a self-fulfilling prophecy when not dealt with very carefully, no. So napakasimpleng exchange rate pero biglang maapektuhan yung mga importers natin na nagte-trade at nagbebenta dito sa Pilipinas. So this can actually lead to higher prices if our imported consumption goods will become more expensive. At the
Correct,
same
correct.
time, raw materials will become more expensive. No, so this is really a balance. No, on one hand, you want exchange rate to be higher to benefit the
The
exporters, the
OFWs and the
BPOs,
exporters, yes.
but at the same time, a large part of our economy is really dependent on imported raw materials. No? So this is just around 1 to 2% general depreciation. So if we can just keep it within 2 to 3% of depreciation, I think we should be okay.
And how much do you expect prices to go up? The BSP has already said that it does not intervene in the currency market to prevent day-to-day volatility, but to dampen inflationary swings in the exchange rate over time. Yun po yung kanilang statement when it comes to that. Although, back in October, no, binaba po nila na 25 basis points yung key policy rate. Sinabi po nila na they still see a 25 basis point cut in December, an additional one in the first quarter. So do you see them pushing through with that as we see what's happening now?
I think so. No, so I think the exchange rate would be less of their worry versus the slowdown of our economy. No? So in relation to that, since you still have an inflation rate of way below 4%, so they still have a very huge room to take care of the economy problem, the economic growth problem, rather than inflation problem. No? So
Mm.
and usually it takes 12 to 18 months for a policy rate cut, no, to be translated into economic growth. No? So
Ah, oo.
kasi the banks will still have to readjust, recalculate their final lending rate according
Mm-mm.
to the risk profiles of their clients, no. So yung 4.75 percent policy rate, yung 25 basis points na kinat, no, and then another 25 basis points sa December, another 25 basis points sa first quarter, yung mga yan kakagat pa 12 to 18 months after, no. So asahan pa natin yan towards the end of 2026 and first half of 2027.
Although
So
sinabi po nila that the recent peso depreciation could be caused by that, those pronouncements, no, yung expectation nga po of monetary policy easing by the BSP, but they also acknowledged a potential moderation in economic growth due to the infra spending controversy. Is this the first time that the government is actually recognizing the impacts of the flood control probe? Remember that at the start of the month, nagkaroon po ng statement ang SEC chairperson na nagkaroon ng wipeout ng 1.7 trillion in market value, which the special assistant
Was reversed.
to the President for Investment and Economic Affairs said na fake news daw ito. Is this the first time that the government is actually acknowledging an impact to the economy with a statement of the BSP? And ano po ang inyong palagay nga dun sa ano, no? Yung sa effect nga nung kanilang pronouncement na kami ay magbababa pa lalo ng interest rates.
yes. So there are two things, no. So number one, yung pagbaba talaga nung ekonomiya natin, o yung pagbagal ng ekonomiya natin is really obvious from the numbers that were released, no. For example, yung the second quarter, no, mula April hanggang June, of our public infrastructure spending, yung government spending on infrastructure, in the middle of our supposedly most dramatic midterm elections of our history, we spent -8. So we spent actually less. The government spent less money for infrastructure in second quarter. So this is a result of all this squabbling, tension, disagreements about budget allocations, etc., and the fear of the agencies themselves to actually procure this kasi ang daming naglalabasan. So the government's number one role is to actually spend the money they've collected from us. So otherwise sa tayo na lang, yung 76% ng Filipino families na lang sana ang gumastos ng mga batas, ng mga buwis na yon kung hindi nila kinolekta. So kinolekta din na sa atin yun eh. So therefore dapat ibalik nila sa system yun. Kumbaga parang sa bathtub, kailangan ibalik mo sa bathtub yung tubig na na-drain kasi kinolekta yun as taxes. So but if you did not inject that again, no? So and in fact you actually injected less versus last year. So that actually cut our economic growth, no. So but actually buti na lang bumaba yung presyo ng bigas at ng ibang bilihin towards the second quarter. So ni-rescue tayo actually ng inflation in the second quarter. Pero kung magpapatuloy yung negative spending, negative growth in the spending of infrastructure as also already sounded off by BSP. So yung makita mo yung inflation ngayon, 'di ba, pababa hanggang 0.9, pero ngayon tumataas na siya 1.3, 1.7. So papunta na siya doon sa 2, yung bandwidth na 2 to 4%. Yun po kasi ang inaalagaan ng BSP, 2 to 4%. Kapag lumampas na yun ng 4, medyo mahihirapan na mag-adjust ang mga consumers at ang mga pabrika, ang mga offices, mga corporations. So nakikita mo na yung trajectory na pataas na uli yung inflation. So pagdating ng fourth quarter, the actual numbers of our GDP which will be released I think middle of November. So you don't want to be surprised later on na ang actual third quarter economy has actually slowed down as a result of the continuous less spending in infrastructure. So kaya ngayon si BSP, okay, sige, medyo parang busy si national government, si fiscal policy, tutulungan na namin ito, no? Okay, sige. May exchange rate pero 1 day, 2 days pa lang naman ito. Let's take a look at this. We won't be bothered by it first. Ang tinitingnan ni BSP, paano niya matutulungan yung fiscal policy, yung national government in terms of, additional support in economic
Spending.
growth.
Oo, oo.
Habang mababa pa at hindi pa umaapak ng 3 to 4% ang inflation. Kasi by that time, may ipit na si BSP, sasabihin lang ni BSP, national government, pasensya ka na, hindi na muna ako makakatulong sa iyo sa economic growth push. Kasi baka lumampas na yung inflation natin, tatamaan na naman ulit yung consumers natin, which is 76% ng ekonomiya natin. So,
Okay, sir, dahil
ngayon
nandun
pa
pa po
lang,
tayo, nandun pa tayo sa sinasabi niyo 2 to 4% na inaalagaan na inflation. Kumbaga may room pa, no,
Oo, in
for
fact,
that,
nasa
no?
1.7 pa lang eh. So,
Oo.
habang nandoon pa, sige, parang pwede pa nating tulungan ng national government. Economic growth, economic. Kasi dalawa lang naman yan, eh, economic growth o inflation. That's what you call the sacrifice ratio. So, kapag gusto mong tulungan yung economic growth, isasakripisyo mo, papabayaan mo yung inflation na mag-accelerate. So, pagka kinontrol mo naman ang inflation, kailangan be ready na isacrifice ang economic growth. Kailangan pabayaan mong bumagal kasi pababagalin mo nga yung demand ng tao by higher
But sir,
interest rate.
in practical terms, no, how does this impact our households? How should they brace themselves for the short term? And what should they do to protect themselves from the weakening peso?
So, yung weakening peso, it's actually an opportunity for our consumers, no? So, for as long as it still remains below 61, I think, no, yung ano ko lang diyan. Kasi around 17 million Filipinos are bound to benefit a little bit more from a slightly depreciated currency. So, marami sa mga Filipino families are recipients of OFW families. So, ngayon pa lang, napataas yung exchange rate mo, mag-ipon ka na ng pagko-convert mo so that you can have this thing called windfall, no? So, just because nag-i-increase yung exchange rate mo, may dagdag na savings ang ating mga Filipino families. So, they can actually now buy the things that they can buy now in relation to this, additional savings or additional padala just because of the exchange rate, no? So, yung mga kailangan nilang bilhin na nila, yung mga kailangan bayaran tuition, bayaran nila. So, habang hindi pa tayo nagkakaproblema, I think wag naman, ano, pero yung problema lilitaw pa yan 1 to 2 months from now, if and when, no? So, pero hopefully there are enough warnings already within the week, no? And then magkakaroon tayo ng matagal na pause this weekend. So that should, stabilize, give us time to
Some
reflect on
time,
what to
yes.
do. So,
Siguro ang tanong po ng
therefore,
mga tao kung ito na nga po yung time na magpapalit. Kasi kung sabi po ninyo na inaasahan po dito na kumbaga baka pwede pa mag 61, 62, hindi pa ho kasi 59 pa lang, 59.13 pa lang.
pero well, don't speculate too much, pero I think the 60, 61, so pero kung masaya ka sa papalit na 59 hanggang 60, pwede pa yan pumalo ng 61. Again, dumudugo yung trade deficit natin. So, just by basic economics, kapag may
Correct.
trade deficit, magdi-depreciate. So, unless biglang mag-shift ng gears si BSP for some greater announcements later on next week na, we are ready to intervene. So, kukunin muna nila ng konti yung nasa reserves at i-release nila sa economy natin para bumalik sa 58 at 57 ang exchange. No? So, just to manage speculation, sentiments. No? Pero
Correct.
59, 60, pagpapalit na kayo at bilhin nyo na yung dapat yung bilhin para sa mga anak ninyo. And then,
I guess
later
the
na natin
remittances will push this back down, right? Back up in Philippine peso pagka nagkaroon na ng inflow pagdating ng December. So mga November,
kaya nga unti-unti habang
November
mataas
yan.
pa, kunin mo na. Tapos siguro, from the point of view ng mga maliliit na negosyo na involved sa tourism, no? So this should also have
Give them a
provide them a
boost.
short-term
Yes.
opportunity na o i-market nyo na yung ano nyo sa mga foreigners, sa mga nag-Airbnb dyan or whatever, no? So, this should actually be more attractive for foreigners, especially in light of the upcoming holidays, no? So, our tourism sector should be more attractive for foreign tourists at this level of exchange rate.
Okay. Thank you for helping us understand that from both sides. The impacts of the weakening peso to a dollar. It is at 59.13 from yesterday's trading closing at record low since December of 2024. In the meantime, maraming salamat po no, for giving us sound advice, economic advice. Ronilo Balbiera, an economist from the University of Asia and the Pacific. And coming right up, with the Philippines officially receiving the ASEAN chairmanship from Malaysia, President Bongbong Marcos continues to be optimistic that the code of conduct in the South China Sea can reach a conclusion, expressing hope that it will happen under the Philippines chairmanship. All that and more when we return after a quick break. Welcome back. You're still watching Morning Matters here in One News. Civil society organizations warned the Senate Committee on Finance about what they describe as malignant cancer growths in the country's budget. During yesterday's hearing, Roundtable for Inclusive Development co-convener Adolfo Jose Montesa said the House-approved General Appropriations Bill contains three critical areas of concern likened to tumors threatening the nation's fiscal health. The first, called Soft Pork, involves 8 programs that should support citizens' rights, but instead turn people into clients and politicians into gatekeepers. The second tumor, Hard Pork, appears in infrastructure projects where political and economic interests overshadow transparent needs-based planning. And the final tumor is the shadow budget, which consists of unprogrammed appropriations that have grown to 1.1 trillion in congressional insertions since 2022. Civil society groups urge removing these funds and creating an open budget transparency server to allow the public to monitor allocations and restore accountability. And joining us today, we have on the show AJ Montesa, co-convener of the Roundtable for Inclusive Development. Good morning. Welcome to Morning Matters.
Good morning, Gretchen. Thanks for having me.
Okay. First of all, when you describe soft pork as turning citizens into clients and politicians into gatekeepers, what specific programs or patterns did you observe?
Yes, yung first pork na sinasabi natin no, ay yung soft pork, which is yung specific programs na kapaloob sa mga ayuda programs. So ayuda programs like the MAIFIP or yung medical assistance of the DOH, yung AICS ng DSWD or yung assistance to individuals in crisis situations, so AICS, and then yung TUPAD ng DOLE, which is unemployment assistance. And then we even found that, for example, yung Tulong Dunong program, which is more supposed to be scholarships for college students under the CHED, is also a form of soft pork. We noticed, number one, we call it cancerous, no, because we didn't just look at the 2026 budget. We looked at the budgets for the past years, and we noticed that starting in 2022, these programs have been growing almost exponentially. So it's very similar to a cancer that if left unchecked, it will really grow. And nagkakaroon siya ng patron-client relationship because of the way that these projects are implemented. For you to avail of these, you usually have to be connected, you have to know a politician. So for example, for medical assistance, you have to get a guarantee letter from a senator, for a congressman. And for a lot of Filipinos, they don't have that. They don't have connections like that. No? So it's not based on need necessarily. A lot of people, of course, they have needs here. But a lot of it, the disbursement of these programs is based on political connections that fosters dependencies on politicians or patron-client dynamics.
Is that how you describe pork? What makes a budget item qualify under that description? Is it related to that patron-client relationship?
Right. We get this question a lot, no, because yung pork, very strictly speaking, in the Belgica ruling on the PDAF, no, they already declared pork unconstitutional. And for example, the description of pork was the collective body of rules and practices that govern the manner by which lump sum discretionary funds primarily intended for local projects are utilized through the respective participations of the legislative and executive branches of government, including its members. So that's a mouthful, but basically, before the pork was embodied in the PDAF, no, they would distribute it to Kongs, and then the Kongs and senators can choose whether to implement that as soft programs katulad ng ayuda or as hard programs katulad ng mga iilang infrastructure, pagpapatayo ng mga multipurpose building, etc. No, so we'll get to that later. But basically, the essence of pork, even if it's not in PDAF, is the same. That the congressmen, the senators, can influence how these funds are released, distributed, basically, essentially, how they are implemented. No? And we notice that these programs, naka-lump sum kasi siya. If you look at the General Appropriations Act, these are lump sum amounts, and when they're implemented, nakapart na ito per congressman, per senator, kung magkano yung naka-allocate. And again, that's why there is a system of guarantee letters. They really are able to exercise sort of a gatekeeping role. They create a dependency with the voters, and they use that during the election period.
Actually, natanong na nga namin yan tungkol dun sa specifically yung MAIFIP, no? Sabi naman ng DOH, hindi na daw kailangan dumaan sa politiko kahit daw sa kanilang, pati DSWD, kahit daw sa kanilang mga social welfare worker, maaari ka nang makakuha ng parang guarantee letter. Paano yung mga gano'n, no? Kasi isn't it also difficult to somehow clump them in one category altogether? Wala ba dito kahit papaano legal or, I mean, acceptable at the very least?
Yeah, I understand. We're not calling na matanggal po yung system ng assistance. We're not calling na tanggalin yung medical assistance for our citizens. No, in fact, our perspective on this is this should be rights-based and rules-based. Meaning every citizen, every taxpayer has a claim to their right for healthcare, their right for education, their right for unemployment assistance. What we're cautioning against is when there is the influence of the politician to use this, to weaponize this, and to create a culture of dependency. So that's why we're calling this out, no? Para ma-reimagine yung healthcare system natin na hindi na siya nakadepende sa politiko. Magkaroon tayo ng stronger universal healthcare, for example, that at the point of service at the hospital, yung mga mahihirap na Pilipino na kababayan natin ay mabigyan ng serbisyo without prejudice to their economic situation. They don't have to look for politicians or local executives. Connections, yes, basically. So, dapat nandun na siya sa hospital mismo, yung funding, para mabigyan sila ng healthcare na base sa pangangailangan nila.
Kumbaga, ididiretso na yung pondo. Hindi nabibigyan, tama ba, hindi nabibigyan yung legislative office to have a say in this? But how about
Yes.
the executive? Like when it comes to, for example, the DSWD handling the ayuda programs, what would you have to say about that?
Yes, actually, it is better if the executive does this, no? Because they have the bureaucracy. For example, yung DSWD, dati meron silang listahanan na tinatawag o yung National Household Targeting System. Nareforma yun at ngayon meron na silang community-based monitoring system. So they actually have data at the community, at the barangay level of who are the citizens in most need. And sana ito yung basis, no? That's why we're calling it, it should be rules-based. The agency should be the ones to identify. The problem if you give it to the politician, no, number one, they don't have that technical bureaucracy course, they're a politician. They were elected to craft laws. No, they were not elected to implement these programs. And then number two, because of that, ang tendency is ang incentive nila ay i-allocate siya based on their political incentives. No? So that is to court voters rather than to respond to the needs of the people. So it really is better if you give it to the National Implementing Agency and you make the rules very clear. You don't make it contingent on political connections or kung sino yung politiko na gusto mamigay. You make it very clear that this is something that is based on the rights of the citizen and based on the needs or the rules that are set forth.
Under soft pork, which refers to the ayuda or aid programs, you calculated about 156 billion worth of insertions. How did you get to that number?
So, this is a tricky thing, no? Yung insertions is a very controversial term na ginagamit. But basically, what we were looking at is the comparison of the National Expenditure Program and the GAA. So, the NEP or the National Expenditure Program, ito po kasi yung initial document na pinopropose ng Pangulo, ng DBM. So this is essentially the executive or the president's budget. It reflects sort of what are the priorities of the administration and also what the agencies are able or what they're prioritizing to implement. When it comes to the political process, no, the final version of that is the General Appropriations Act, yung budget na, yung final na budget na tinatawag natin. But because there is a lack of transparency in between that, the House version, the Senate version, and the BICAM, we don't see that anymore. All we can do is compare the final budget versus the initial
To the proposed
national
one.
Yes. And if you make the comparison per program, you can do it kasi per program na kung ano yung amount na pinopose ng executive versus kung ano yung napasa nila. You can just compare the differences. What we've noticed now, I can't share the graph on screen now, but since 2022, lumalaki yung agwat ng NEP sa GAA. Meaning, every year, since 2022, they are adding more and more funds to these programs. And in fact, this 2026, we compared the NEP to the House version of the General Appropriations Bill, the one that the House passed on third reading. 70 billion na yung insertions dito sa mga programs that we mentioned as soft pork. So they're really starting to favor these programs. They're starting to see it as a political tool. That's why we're warning really against the emphasis on soft pork.
Oh, before, what was the normal threshold for these 8 programs to be able to compare the 70 billion to?
Yeah, well, I don't have the raw numbers right now, no. But one thing I will say is we noticed that the differences are going up. The natural question you should ask is, if the budget for these items are going up, they must be taking that out from somewhere else. And we tried to dig into that, and we found out that while these programs are going up, the programs for other rules-based social protection are actually going down. Halimbawa, nandito yung 4Ps o yung Pantawid Pamilya program. What we noticed is, since 2022, they're starting to cut the budget for that, no? And this is concerning because 4Ps has been an exemplary program, napag-aralan na siya, it has produced results, and it's rules-based. You cannot just receive 4Ps, you really have to be a member of the poorest households, may conditions siya na you should be sending your children to school to receive healthcare. No? So it's a very effective program, but they've been cutting this in favor of the AICs because yung AICs yung madaling i-distribute sa panahon ng election, halimbawa. No? Yung MAIFIP, they're starting to emphasize this more than, for example, the PhilHealth. So again, we've noticed the trend for PhilHealth. They started cutting it. In fact, yung last year's budget in 2025, they zeroed out the budget for PhilHealth. And we know that the PhilHealth is supposed to be the mechanism by which we can finance our healthcare expenditures. No? So
Correct.
instead of strengthening these programs, the politicians have begun to emphasize yung mga soft pork o yung mga ayuda-based programs because again, these foster the patron-client relationships with the voters.
Pero bago ito sa aking pandinig na nababanggit din yung tulong-dunong program alongside those ayuda programs, what are you seeing with that? Is it that, yun nga, driven primarily through universities, yung aid program na yon?
So, we noticed this one. So, yung tulong-dunong program kasi is under ng CHED, no? And then under ng CHED, there are several programs. For example, there is the Universal Access to Quality and Tertiary Education. Yun yung bahagi ng Free Tertiary Education Act, no? But there is a specific scholarship. It's the Tertiary Education Scholarship, no? Yung TESS na tinatawag, no? This is the one that I think CHED would prefer to implement. What we noticed with the tulong-dunong is it doesn't exist in the NEP. It's similar to ACAP, if you're familiar with the ACAP program. So the ACAP program was implemented in just the past 2 years. This doesn't appear in the National Expenditure Program, but when Congress has finished its deliberations, suddenly there is this new program called the AKAP and the
Sabay
Tulong
kam.
Dunong
Oo,
program. So yung
pinasok
AKAP
yung
is also like
akap.
an ayuda program. Yung Tulong Dunong, yes. And what we've heard is it was a favorite program of the former Speaker Martin Romualdez, no, yung AKAP. Yung Tulong Dunong naman, favorite din siya ng mga kongresista because it's actually the congressman who is able to decide kung kanino ibibigay yung scholarships na ito rather than the CHED. No? So that's why they're parking some of the funds here and the Tulong Dunong program. And I think our analysis is showing that this is coming at the expense of the more rationalized tertiary education subsidy or tertiary education scholarships. No? So we're really warning against this right now. The Tulong Dunong is just at 2.7, but there's nothing wrong with scholarships, but we should take away the ability of the politicians to give these out, to hand these out as if sa kanila nang gagaling. Pero po ito ng taong bayan. So this is something that we are supposed to be entitled to as our rights.
Oo, so parang may redundancy din doon. Kung meron na tayong tertiary education scholarship at meron pa tayong tulong-dunong, nagiging pareho na lamang yon.
Yes,
Oo,
nagiging
oo.
pareho lamang, and then yung isa pa ay sensitive pa sa mga political considerations, no. So we want to do away with
okay.
that, no. Like, let's just emphasize the programs that are really outcome based, that are really rights based and rules based rather than political.
Okay, ngayon puntahan naman natin yung pangalawang cancer, which is the hard pork related to infrastructure projects. What number are you seeing here? Of course, we have been zoning on flood control projects. Did you take a look at the whole infrastructure budget?
Right. So one of the reasons why we really realized na nagiging parang cancer ito, no, is because nung pumutok yung flood control issue, parang cancer, you won't realize that you already have cancer until biglang lumabas yung symptoms, no. And the flood control scandal was just one of the symptoms. When it came out, naglabas si BBM ng Sumbong sa Pangulo website, and scraping the data, what you'll find is that there are 547 billion pesos worth of projects under that, no. But when we looked at the actual budget documents, there's actually 1.2 trillion pesos worth in that 2018 to 2025 time period. Meaning, yung Sumbong
Kulang
sa
pa
Pangulo
ng
doesn't
kalahati.
account for 653 billion pesos worth.
Bakit
no?
kaya? Saan
Tapos,
napunta yun? Oh, ba't hindi siya
Ayun.
matrace?
That's an interesting question. We also don't know the answer to that, why they chose to put some of the projects in the Sumbong sa Pangulo and why they didn't put it in the Sumbong sa Pangulo website. No? So that's a lingering question. The bigger question that we should ask is, flood control pa lang ito. What about the other programs inside the DPWH? Because if you think about it, mas malawak pa yung programa ng DPWH. So we did some budget analysis. Yung agency kasi meron siyang mga programs under its mandate. No? So for example, isa dyan yung flood management program. Ito yung napansin natin. There are other programs, halimbawa yung pagtatayo ng mga bridge. So there is a bridge program. Yung pagtatayo ng mga roads. So there's a network development program. And then there is what is called a convergence and special support program. No? So before I explain this, what we noticed with the data is yung insertions, yung tinatawag natin na difference between the final budget and the NEP, yung insertions alone just for these convergence and special support programs were as large per year as the flood control budget.
Wow.
Yung insertions pa lang, kasing laki na niya yung flood management program ng DPWH. And yung convergence program na ito, yung convergence projects na ito, ang nakapaloob po dito, nandito yung mga multipurpose buildings, mga
Yes.
evacuation center, nandito yung mga roads that are supposedly supposed to connect different agencies and outcomes. So halimbawa, roads leading to tourism centers, roads leading to seaports, airports, et cetera, no? Nandito din yung, for example, CPAG na infrastructure and basic infrastructure program, no? Dito din, napa-flag in the recent Senate hearings, I think this was a hearing na preside ni Senator Lauren Legarda, na point out yung mga allocable shares. 'Di ba? Yung inaalok supposedly sa mga congressman. So we're starting to notice two things. Malaki yung insertions dito sa mga programang ito. At number two, baked na into the budgeting system yung allocation, yung allocable shares na nagiging pork na rin. Because these are not determined by scientific planning. Ang sinasabi, ang lumalabas sa hearing ay nakadepende ito sa alok ng congressman o kung ano yung negotiation nila, kung saan nila gustong ilagay. So again, a congressman, hindi naman yan planner, hindi naman yan urban planner, hindi naman yan developmental planner. politician siya na elected to craft laws. So suddenly, your infrastructure program is determined more by political considerations rather than it is by a master plan na tinatawag or a scientific evidence-based plan. So lalabas at lalabas na magkakaroon ka ng
Were you able to get to a number? Were you able to get to a number for the hard pork?
For the hard pork, yes. We flagged the entire wait, I'll pull up my slides
Kasi
now.
ang
But we were
computation
able
ni Leandro dito ay 25%. Kumbaga parang sabi niya, i-slash na natin tawag dito, across the board, 25% of the DPWH budget if yun yung sinasabing patong dito nga sa presyo ng mga proyekto. Pero sa inyo,
Well,
how did you do it?
syempre ibang approach 'yun, no. That's one way to look at it, no. Again, all of these things are very opaque, so it's very difficult, no. But for example, one number is in 2025, last year's budget, the insertions alone to the Convergence and Special Support Program was over 260 billion pesos. So that is insertions. Wala pa dun yung naka-bake into na allocable shares na tinatawag, no. So it's hard to estimate that per se, but we're estimating that for at least for the Convergence program, mukhang at least 200 billion yan. And then that's not to mention yung asset preservation program pa. Yung asset preservation is yung pagme-maintenance sa daan, no. So kung napapansin natin, minsan may mga daan na maayos naman, tapos biglang kakalkalin, tapos aayusin ulit para masabi na gumawa sila ng proyekto. There are insertions also there. So we noticed na sa asset preservation, 55 billion yung insertions dito last year. So in the 2026 budget, what we noticed was, tinanggal kasi yung flood management program, di ba? So 250 billion. Yung asset preservation, in fact, from the NEP to the GAB to the House version, tumaas siya by 10 billion sa asset preservation. And yung convergence, tumaas siya by 66 billion. No, so it's smaller than what we've noticed in the past few years, no. But that is probably because nagbabantay na tayo. Alam nila na it's not going to be as easy to get this through. That's why it's very important na magpatuloy yung transparency, yung participation ng civil society.
But what is your group's proposal when it comes to this? Dahil yun nga, yan yung medyo parang while asset management and also flood control management, kumbaga parang pagkatapos mo itayo ang isang building, mini-maintain mo, no? Yung mga pinatayo mo. Essential pa rin naman yun. But what is
Yes.
your proposal in watching these line items of the budget?
So, maybe we can tackle it in two ways now. First is the substance and second is the process. In terms of substance of the budget, we agree, very critical pa rin naman ang infrastructure spending. Very important part ito to implement our development plan. So we're not saying na i-zero ang infrastructure. What we're saying is infrastructure projects should be planned based on scientific planning, based on nature-based solutions, no, based on a transparent master plan. So yun yung keyword, yung master plan, no. I think lumalabas na ito sa mga hearing na during the time of Secretary Babe Singson, no, we noticed in the data kasi maliit yung insertions nung panahong yun from 2010 to 2016. Almost non-existent yung insertions nun. And I think he explained this because during their administration, they had a master plan. So nakaplanado na yan. They know what they are going to implement because these are long-term projects that you can't just do willy-nilly. They are things that you should plan ahead, right? So they had a master plan and alam nila na ganito yung gagawin nila. So very minimal yung kayang gawing insertions doon because the politicians, they won't be able to justify it.
Correct.
Nawala yon, unfortunately. So what we want is we go back to that, no, number one. Number two, maging transparent yun, kita dapat ng taong bayan yun. And number three, mag-emphasize din tayo ng nature-based solutions. No? Semento tayo ng semento for flood control, but in a lot of places in the Philippines, yung gray infrastructure is not necessarily the best solution. No? So that is for the substance. I think, in comment ko na lang ay sa process ay, all of these has to be transparent. That's why we've been calling for a transparency server so that any insertion, any realignment of the budget, any infrastructure proposal from a politician, dapat nakikita kung sino yung nagpropose, kung ano yung mga proyekto.
Tama.
So we want that entire system to be transparent. Yung sinabi ko kanina na in between the NEP and the GAA, dapat kitang-kita, documented lahat ng iyon. And then, so open the bycam, for example. Dapat
Parang
kita natin lahat.
ayon sa sinabi ng Pangulo, mahiya naman sila. Dahil
Yes,
nandun
yes.
yung pangalan nila. Hindi pa natin napag-uusapan yung pangatlo, which is shadow pork relating to the unprogrammed appropriations. But unfortunately, we're running out of time. But thank you for helping us understand those things. And we hope you continue to sound the alarm on these pork in the budget, these pork insertions in the budget, which continue to exist. Maraming salamat. We have AJ Montesa, co-convener of the Roundtable for Inclusive Development.
Thank you so much, Gretchen.
On the final day of the ASEAN Summit in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia officially turned over the ASEAN chairmanship to the Philippines. President Bongbong Marcos said the Philippines has been preparing for 8 months, calling the chairmanship an opportunity for the country. He remains optimistic that the code of conduct in the South China Sea can reach a conclusion, hopefully during the Philippines chairmanship.
Cannot fail because we have to find a way forward. We have to find a better way of dealing with these things.
The president said he intends to invite Chinese President Xi Jinping to come to the Philippines for ASEAN events in 2026, noting that Premier Li Qiang often represents China at such meetings.
I will certainly invite him, and I would make all of the efforts available, all of the ways available, the means that we have available to us, to show how sincere to President Xi Jinping, how sincere we are, that we would like for him to come to the Philippines. That would presume that we have made some serious progress in our talks with them. And so if we get to that point where President Xi will actually consider coming to the Philippines.
Meanwhile, despite business groups expressing disappointment over the slow pace of the corruption probe, Marcos said it cannot be rushed. He said the political phase is over and the matter is now in the legal process.
I get messages all day, every day. Ikulong mo na yan. Alam naman natin kung sino sila. Ikulong mo na. Kunin mo lahat ng pera nila. Pagbenta mo na yung mga bahay nila, ibalik sa ano. What would then I be accused of if we did that?
And that wraps up today's episode of Morning Matters. We hope we've given you the right start to your Wednesday morning. Let's go ahead and make the day matter. My name is Gretchen Ho. Kapatid, we are One News, all sides, all the time.